Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now this is the Intel ARC A380. More specifically it's the ASRock ITX OC edition, a tiny little card that in its own right I cannot fault. It looks good, it hits 2450 MHz in games and stays there. Plus it rarely exceeds 60 degrees and it's very quiet in operation. Under low load the fan will stop altogether. You also get AV1 video encoding. That said, we're focusing on gaming performance today, and despite ASRock's nice looking version of this entry-level ARC A380, it is still an ARC A380, meaning that right now it's difficult to recommend. Currently priced between £170 and £180 here in the UK, I'm inclined to try and persuade you to turn your attention to used market alternatives instead, even if you're someone who isn't keen on purchasing a second-hand card. 1650 Supers and RX 580s can be found for less than the price of an A380, and they will perform better, especially if you have an older system that doesn't support resizable bar. The feature of course that is essential to getting the best performance from an ARC card. Even an RX 6400 will give this thing a good run for the money, providing you've got a PCIe 4.0 compatible setup. Furthermore, and just like with the A750 and A770, the A380 may be problematic in certain older DX11 titles and below, though things will surely get better in that regard with future driver updates. I said it before and I'll say it again, you should be prepared to take on the early adopter role if you buy one of these. Now that's fine if, like me, you're buying one to test and revisit as improvements are made down the line, but for the average consumer, and one who's got less than £200 or the equivalent to spend on a graphics card, you're surely going to want something that's guaranteed to just work out of the box, without worrying about poor performance in older games and whether or not the fairly infantile drivers are going to give you issues. The ARC A380 doesn't make much sense to me right now, not at the price I've seen it at, but let's check out some games. Cyberpunk 2077 at native 1080p with the medium texture settings and everything else on low runs at 40 frames per second. Remember that all of today's tests have been carried out with resizable bar enabled. The percentile figures are okay and overall there wasn't much stutter or significant performance dips. It's playable to an extent, but you should expect closer to 35 FPS or less in high action sequences or missions. To alleviate some of these issues we can make use of FSR, which renders the game at a lower internal resolution and upscales it to our display's output. Setting FSR mode to balanced means that our average sits closer to 60, but this isn't consistent. I would suggest not dropping the FSR quality any lower, as the game will quickly become a blurry mess. Elden Ring at 1080p performs the same at low as it does at medium, which perhaps reflects some sort of driver issue as opposed to a hardware one. Don't quote me on that though. The game is playable, don't get me wrong, but for the price paid, I don't think this is a particularly satisfying return. I'm starting to see a lot of ARC A380s inside pre-builts as well, so I think it's important to cover this card now, but as I said, I can't recommend it at this point in time. In COD Modern Warfare 2, ideally 60 FPS is what we'd want for a fast-paced online multiplayer shooter like this, as it can be instrumental in staying competitive. That's why I opted to use FSR here once again, this time setting it to quality mode. This made the performance much better than playing at 1080p native. Our average is pretty solid during this game of ground war, without too much of a visual sacrifice, but there are still going to be some dips into the low 50s and high 40s. I'm looking forward to see how the ARC A380 improves over time with drivers, but I have a feeling that by the time most of the issues are ironed out, it's going to be obsolete anyway, with newer entry-level options offering much better performance for similar or less money. Marvel Spider-Man Remastered does okay at low with TAA. The ARC A380 supports ray tracing by the way, but I'm not even going to touch that in today's video. It makes no sense doing so with a card like this, but I am open to making a dedicated video on the subject if you want me to. I am rooting for the ARC A380, I'm glad we've got more competition, especially at the lower end, and I look forward to seeing what we actually get in this space next from Intel. Spider-Man has FSR 2.1 support, which looks fantastic honestly, and even when selecting the balanced preset it doesn't look too much different from native 1080p. The game now runs at over 60 frames per second while still looking good even at the low preset. This is definitely how I'd play the game if I used one of these cards on a daily basis. There used to be some flickering issues, but since the latest driver update this has mostly been resolved. I noticed a couple of visual glitches, but that was it, so it looks like the drivers are already getting better. When it comes to Red Dead Redemption 2, I'm always satisfied with at least 30 FPS, probably because I've spent years playing it on PlayStation at this frame rate. Here it runs at 46 on average with console equivalent settings, so you are getting a better than last gen console experience as far as performance is concerned. FSR is also available here, but it only added about 5 FPS in balanced mode, and it also added this weird shimmering effect to the visuals, so I'd rather keep it off. Overwatch 2 can be played at 1080p native without any resolution scaling options enabled. That said, I stuck with low preset because it didn't look much different to high, yet performance is massively improved, and that's exactly what we want from a first-person shooter. As many frames as possible while still retaining enough visual clarity to see enemy players on screen. This was a solid effort from the A380, but then again it should be because this game runs on my grandparents' decade-old laptop. Grand Theft Auto 5 is an older game but an absolute classic. It's running in DX11 mode here, and I think the latest drivers have actually helped with some of the stutter and frame time issues. This was actually a really nice experience at the high settings, and considering this is one of those older games that fits into the category of it could give the A380 trouble, performance was really solid, with the 1.1% lows holding up nicely as well. Finally then we have Apex Legends, another DirectX 11 game. Here the frame rate was fine as far as the average goes, but just look at that frame time graph. It feels incredibly juddery to play. It feels as though I'm playing a 60 frames per second game on a 24Hz monitor. That's the best way I can describe it, even though the percentile lows aren't terrible on paper. You can see by the results that there is a big gap between the average and 1% low figure though. I think that overall the ARC A380 isn't the worst card I've tested in recent times. That honour probably goes to the GTX 1630. I do think this has more to give, and I think driver improvements over time will help with that. In situations like Apex Legends for example, and in other DX11 games that might prove problematic, the A380 lacks the power to push through the challenges that might be imposed by said software issues. More powerful ARC cards like the previously tested A750 can use brute force to help combat this in a way, but the A380 can't. The entry-level hardware in combination with the work-in-progress driver support makes for an unpredictable combination, and unpredictability is what those with a limited graphics card budget don't want. I'm rooting for this thing, I really am, and I do believe it'll get better. Hopefully any improvements will coincide nicely with a price decrease over the next few months too. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like down below, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of the card in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.